But the thing I really resent is in the next part where it says documents or information for discussion in a board meeting that must provide copies of members of the board. I totally agree with that. And for the superintendent, but I totally disagree with they have to be in 24 hours in advance of a scheduled board meeting. I just don't understand why that is an issue. I mean, if you're just presenting something and you're not asking for a discussion, well, I guess that, let me put it that way. Let me ask the question. Has anything been presented that we were asked, or you were asked as a board, that for immediate discussion, that a board member has brought? Like what? Give me an example. Because I don't remember anything. I mean, I brought paperwork to you. I've never asked you to discuss it because I knew you wouldn't.
We've discussed things that you've passed out before. Most
very minimal. No, I don't remember.
With the plus size.
You never discussed it. I handed out and it's put away. Trust me, I watched. I'm serious. I know. So I mean, I don't agree with that, and I really don't agree with somebody having to give it 24 hours in advance, because I just don't understand the reason why that is important. I mean, I get if you have to, if somebody is asking you to just put it as a discussion item, well, that's an agenda thing, so that would definitely have to be there. But to just hand out some paperwork like I've handed out, I don't understand why it has to be 20. I think to me, it feels so like we are trying to once again control not just information, but we're trying to control the board, and I really resent it because I don't think this has been a big issue.
Well,
go for it.
I think there's actually ample evidence of people handing out information and then grilling people at this table about it when they haven't had time to read it or prepare for it, and I don't think that really elevates the level of public discourse and debate. So it's not, I mean, handing something out that potentially you're going to be grilled about, and I'm referring to the way documents have been handed to the superintendent and the business administrator, and then they've been questioned on them when they haven't had a chance to read them. I don't think that really provides the best quality information for the public. So I think that's the reason for
Well, but then, to me, then that is a business, to me, then that is how we control the meeting. If you're handing out paperwork and you're grilling somebody on it, then I think...
Do you like that?
No, I'm not saying it's a like or dislike. I'm just saying...
Do you approve of it?
I am saying that then somebody needs to say, this is not on the agenda, we'll have to talk with, if you can get 3 people to put on the agenda, then we put on the agenda. But I just think to control information like that is inappropriate.
But wouldn't it then raise the bar for getting something handed out? Because then what you're suggesting requires 3 people, as opposed to this lets an individual distribute information, and the 24-hour rule lets it get to board members in time before a meeting.
Okay,
but you're actually making it harder if you say, well, you have to get 2 other board members.
Well, that's what you say anyway. But I'm just saying when I hand out paperwork, for instance, I have never said, okay, I've never grilled anyone. Let's put it that way.
I think that's accurate.
I do not think I've ever grilled anyone. And if I started that, you probably could say, okay, we can't go into this now. But on the other hand, I have to provide this, that means, what am I going to do? Run around town and drop off paperwork? I mean, I just don't like it. I think it's very restrictive. I don't get it. I don't know why it's there except to be restrictive. Let's put it that way. That to me is
provided a reason why it should be
okay,
there.
but I think it's very restrictive.
Michael?
So I have a couple questions on that too, on the 24-hour. It looks like reading this is only for board members. And like I was looking at my paperwork for the October 7th meeting, I left that meeting with 30 new pieces of information or pieces of paper, probably a little over 20, that I got in this meeting. And so when I read this policy, it concerns me that a board member is the only person restricted in terms of handing out information. But everyone else, like employees and stuff, or public, are free to come into the meeting and give out information to everybody, but a board member can't. That seems odd to me.
Well, I actually feel like that's a bit of a fair point, Michael, because we've had this discussion before in the board meetings about the quality of information we get and wishing to get it in advance. And we do get most of the information that we actually discuss comes to us either attached to the memo or attached to the board meeting minutes. So an example, the agenda. An example in Paul's presentation tonight, we didn't have the PowerPoint, but we did have a sheet that gave much of that same information attached to the memo. And I think that the 24-hour rule, unless it's something that is, came up that day that has to be passed out, and that happens sometimes, it should apply to everybody. I do.
But it's not in this policy.
I'm just saying the point. We can change that wording.
But see, I think that will limit information. I think that is the issue to me. I get that people bring in stuff. And so I'm not really that keen on that because I think that, again, limits. And I don't understand why this need to limit information. Doug?
I think there's a qualitative difference between school district employees providing information to us who are asking, we come to these meetings requesting the provision of information. This has to do with a power differential and abuse of board member power. And this is a protective line. As much as you are saying you cannot remember this happening, I clearly remember it happening. So this is something, because the people that we are talking about here, board members versus school district employees, there's a power differential, and the same rules don't apply to school board members and school district employees. So I have seen people in higher power hand out information to school district employees and grill them on them. And that is why I am in favor of having that phrase in this policy. And it is a different, yes, it's handing out pieces of paper, but no, they are not the same things for the reasons I've discussed.
Michael?
So I still had a couple more questions on this. So my issue on this too, I have a couple of issues, and I got something I can hand out right here that I wrote. But most of the stuff that I pass out, and these are 2 pages each. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to staple them, but it's just 2. So my issue when I started writing letters and putting down what my points were was because when I would talk, when I first got on the board a couple of years ago, I'd get cut off and I couldn't make my point or finish a sentence. So what I did is wrote her down like I did now, just wrote 4 pages of more detail of what I'm saying now so that it's part of the record. And that's been very helpful to people in my community to know, they read that and say, okay, I understand what you were saying, and even though I don't get a chance to say it in the meeting. And so that's been the purpose, at least for me, to hand out the letter. The other concern that I point out in the letter is that I think that, making this requirement, the state law says that as a board we can make procedures to run our own meeting, but we can't make procedures that are in conflict with the Open Meetings Act. And I believe that this will put us in conflict of the Open Meetings Act, because if you're requiring a board member to say, well, you can't hand out stuff in the meeting, even if you make copies for everybody, but you have to hand it out 24 hours before to the entire board, then we're starting deliberations outside of the view of the public. And I think that's illegal. And I wouldn't, even if this passes, I would challenge it then,
But you often get information from many sources in advance of the meeting. Are you saying that all things that we discuss should be passed up only at the meeting?
Oh, I get information from other people, but we're not exchanging information as a board, between board members and exchanging information. I think that's inappropriate for a board member to say, well, let's start deliberations now 24 hours before the meeting, and let me start passing out stuff.
He's indicating that a board member is different as...
No, I understand. I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't think deliberations occur until there's back and forth.
Right. I don't think we should be exchanging information amongst each other outside of a public meeting. And so the other thing that occurs to me is that I bet half the time I actually come to meetings ready to pass stuff out, and because of the way the discussion goes, I don't pass it out. And so it would be hard for me to determine 24 hours before, anticipate what the discussion is going to be about if the information I'm going to pass out is even pertinent. I don't know that until we're talking about it. And I do come prepared for that, but I can say 50% of the time I don't pass things out because the discussion didn't warrant that. So again, I would even if this passes, I'll challenge it either in court or with the legislature because I believe it is a violation of the State Open Meetings Act and we can't be doing that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Deb.
Mr. Clara, if you do not believe in sharing any information with board members outside of the meeting, why did you mail me this letter that I have not opened? What should be communicated between you and me in secret that you did not choose to discuss with me in open session?
Well, that's not.
I don't know the contents of the letter because I haven't opened it.
Right, it's
I
not
do
a secret. It's required by the court. That
I
was
do not
the plan.
believe that fits with what you're saying about transfer of information between board members.
Okay, so let me answer your question then. That's required by the court. I was required, when I sued the district for violating, by the way, the Open Meetings Act, it required me to notify the board members
So that's what's in this envelope?
Well, you'll have to open and see, but I'm pretty sure that's what
No,
it
I'm
is.
okay without it.
Right.
Okay, so there's a question.
Well, let me ask another question about the 24-hour. If I want to hand out, if I'm reelected, that information about teachers' numbers. So instead of being able to just hand it out at a meeting like I've done before at the end of the meeting, just handing it out, I have to somehow distribute it to individuals, is what you're basically saying here, somehow.
Well, I think we can clarify that.
That to me is really crazy.
It says to inform an item on the board's meeting agenda. I presume this is written about information that
I keep
someone
reading
wants
this over and over,
to
and I-
discuss right then and there. That is a very different thing than what Mr. Clara did just now, which is hand out a 4-page letter of his views. That
Because
have-
it's
it's
very
not on the
clear what it
agenda and we're
says.
not discussing it. It's just his right to pass that out. Am I getting that wrong?
Well, I'm reading this and I'm sorry that I'm.
It says, if a board member wishes to bring a specific document or piece of information to inform an item on the board's meeting agenda, do we have to clarify that? Because I really thought that the 24-hour rule was to prevent the situation I described, but not necessarily someone handing out a piece of paper saying,
This
these
is
are my
related
views.
to the meeting's board agenda.
Right. No, I think that's
what this
that's the
is.
point.
Well, what I just
Do we have
passed
to
out is
clarify
related.
that?
Can
Sorry.
I finish my thought?
So what you're saying is that when I hand out things, it's okay.
Well, the way I'm reading this, and I could be wrong,
Okay.
I mean, that's why clarification, Christina, where partway down, starting with if a board member wishes to bring a specific document or piece of information to inform an item on the board's meeting agenda, he or she must provide copies for all members of the board and for the superintendent at least 24 hours in advance. To me, that's specific to the agenda item. That's not speaking to, you wanting to hand out, class assignment,
Right.
which isn't on the agenda that night.
Right.
But am I reading that?
Well, right, and I think it's important that everybody's stopping before the end of the sentence.
Right,
Which says
which is-
to allow
and
sufficient
allow
time for the
sufficient
document
time
to be read and considered before expecting it to be
Be
discussed.
discussed.
So it's tied to a board meeting agenda, and it's actually tied to expecting whatever is going to be handed out to be discussed.
Right.
Well, and then when was this done? I guess I'm still questioning when this has been a problem.
Well, I think that, okay, I'm just going to use this for an example, okay,
Okay, go
Michael, just
ahead.
because it's in front of me, that's all. And so for this to come tonight, I would actually like to have an opportunity to read through it, but because we're in the middle of, this discussion and I'm just now getting it, I feel like I can't really discuss what's in here. You can tell me what's in here, but that would be an
Okay, all right,
example of what I'm
okay,
trying.
okay,
I'm sorry if I'm not
I
articulating
know you are
it.
articulating it correctly
That's
now.
what I mean.
I get it, okay.
And I think we had previously, because this is a green section that was just moved from
Moved,
another
right.
place, we had previously said for the superintendent and to allow sufficient time for the document to be read and considered before expecting it to be discussed. So all this language is meant to do is to say that
Clarify
period
what
of
is
time
sufficient
is
time.
24 hours. That's because it can't be 5 minutes. Can't be 5 minutes before the board meeting. got to be enough time that we can work it into our schedules to read it.
And I still haven't heard an example of when, Doug, where's an example of where something has been handed out by a board member and then who's getting grilled on it?
I was referring to you handing pieces of paper to Mikkel or Janet and asking questions to them about material that they hadn't seen before.
Like what? When?
What's an example?
Well, it's been done here.
It's such a
I didn't
commonplace
do
thing.
the action.
Well, give me a couple examples if it's
All
so
right,
common.
so I think that.
I'm not saying it's common. I didn't say
No,
that.
no,
I
that's what she
said
said.
I
the,
said that?
the,
No,
Oh,
Heather
I
did
did.
say
the
that.
reason why, well, in answer to your question of me, the reason why I thought it was valuable to have that in there was because of those instances that have happened. And it is interesting that you do not remember doing that.
It's interesting that you don't have an example either. You're saying that it happened, but
I don't feel the need to have an example. I'm just explaining
I don't think
my
there is any,
support
right.
of the statement of the 24-hour rule.
Right, I don't think there is any. That's why you can't cite it.
Okay, so if we could pull back our discussion back to the policy, that would be appreciated.
Okay, well, I
That's what
appreciate
we're
the
talking
clarity.
about.
I rescind my concern, because I get the clarity.
So I think that's important, sometimes when we get this and we isolate, one thing and it becomes bigger than what it really is. I think that having that information beforehand would be helpful for the discussion and also honor what the person's concerns may be. I think that, let's move on. Let's keep looking at the pieces. Any other questions? That we've got a whole new section on the consent agenda.
Any other questions about things in
Questions
this
about what
document?
is in this?
Besides the 24-hour rule.
So it sounds like we have a cure looking for a disease then, right, on this 24-hour thing?
No.
There's no disease.
Because I haven't heard what the...
No.
Yeah,
What the problem